Hey everyone, welcome to the Building Excellence Podcast. I've got Evan Uyetake with me today. So did I get it right?
You got it right.
Got it right.
First take.
First take. I know that was pretty special. So I'm really excited to have you on. You've been in marketing. You've had your own podcasts. You have a lot of different experiences that there's a lot to learn from. So really excited to have you on. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. I'm not always on this side of the podcast, so it's nice, and man, excited to kind of dig in and see where we go.
Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of give us some behind the scenes to your upbringing, like where did you grow up, and things like that.
Yeah, I'll give you the mile long, inch deep version. I grew up in Michigan. My parents moved over. My dad's Japanese. They lived in Hawaii. They moved to Michigan. I grew up there all the way until I was about 17 years old. Then they moved down here to Oklahoma at the time to go to Rhema, and then my sister was going to ORU. So depending on who you ask, I believe my parents didn't want to get that far away from my sister. They wanted to keep everybody close. So the timing was a little suspect, but it all worked out. For me, it was an opportunity to go to a place that had maybe a little bit more opportunity. I was in a small town in Michigan. Really enjoyed it. Like it was, your typical like 1980s kid. Like we rode our bikes to our friend's house. We had to be home by the time it was dark. I would literally leave home and be in the woods or playing with friends all day long. And I really don't remember where my parents were at the time.
Yeah.
Like I just knew that by the time dinner came around, like everybody was there. So probably you'd get child services called if you did that now, but that was kind of my upbringing. I've been homeschooled. I've gone to public school. I've done private school. I've kind of done the whole gambit of education. So I have kind of unique opinions on all the different things. But looking back at all of that, there was a lot of change that happened in that time. And then for me, obviously coming to Oklahoma, I felt like was the biggest step towards, moving to a bigger city and more opportunity. So I kind of embraced that. Then graduated high school from Grace Christian High School, which does not exist anymore. So I think that means that my high school diploma doesn't exist. So hopefully nobody goes back and looks at my transcripts.
Yeah.
Graduated from there, went to University of Denver for a year, and then ended up at TU. At that time, I met my wife. Actually, I met my wife in high school, and we dated in high school, and then into college. I had a little break, and then ultimately got married. So technically, I married my high school sweetheart, so have that going. We've been married for 17 years, and man, it's flown by. I got two boys. I have a 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. He just turned 13 not too long ago, so I got to make sure I say it right.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that part of it. Once I graduated college, right out of school, got a job at a marketing company and have been there ever since. And it's been a wild ride of learning, growing, and kind of working my way to the top, but then also just really growing in my leadership journey too. So hopefully that gives you kind of the cliff notes, but man, it's been a ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot right in there. But were there any experiences that kind of shaped you growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, being homeschooled, I had a very small knit group, and there was other families that would do stuff, and definitely had some good memories there. But as I progressed in my education and age, I kind of felt like I was uprooted every single time. And when that happened, it kind of forced me to become independent. And for me, like I'm not one that likes change, but I knew that those changes were necessary at the time. Like for me to go to public school, like that was something that I wanted to do. And I really just felt like, I wasn't reaching my full potential at public or at homeschool and private school. And I just wanted to kind of expand my friend group. But when I got there, I recognized that, man, some of these people had friendships their whole lives. And I was kind of jumping into that. So I felt a little bit like an outsider. And so it was really hard to kind of crack into that. It was difficult. So I think part of that's where I became very independent. I didn't want to ever depend on anybody. and I wanted to just kind of do my own thing and maybe potentially earn my place, or be the kind of person that people wanted to hang out with. So I think some of that stuff goes back really early, and then obviously kind of going to college, that really taught me a lot about myself. I had to make some pretty serious decisions. I think the first one was just figuring out what I wanted my major to be, and going through that process. Excuse me. Going through that process, I felt like I was looking at a menu, and I was like, okay, that sounds good. I think I'll be that. And so I don't recommend that as something that you do when you're trying to figure out what to do with the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I took some things that I thought I was good at, and I started to pursue those, and got all the way through my college career, and got to the other side and realized that I had a degree in something that I wasn't necessarily passionate about. And I had good grades in college, graduated from the University of Tulsa. This is probably not the best promotion for the University of Tulsa, but I graduated, and then I went to find a job. Well, the industry that I was in, which was more computer stuff, it was really hot at the time that I went to school. By the time I graduated, it had slowed significantly, and so the ability to find a job was really difficult. And in that process, I took some aptitude tests, and I failed them. And man, talk about crushing to your spirit. You're like, I graduated college, I learned this specific thing, and then when I got into the real world, it was completely different than what I expected. And not to say that I didn't know what I was doing. I knew what I was doing, but the things they were testing you on was instead of it being theory of how this thing works, it was actual ability to do. And I had very little experience in that. And so for me, in that process, I really had to make a hard decision. Do I continue to pursue something that I'm not necessarily passionate about, or take a look at the things that I knew were actual strengths for me? And that was probably the first kind of toe in the water of maybe looking a little differently at what my career could be and what I wanted to do. And if I had done that, maybe sophomore, junior of high school, I probably could have better prepared myself. Not saying that you can't get experience from anything that you do. I obviously got experience all the way through that. But I think that was a really major point for me to say, what are my giftings? What are my talents? What are the things that I'm passionate about? What are the things that energize me? Or what's risen to the top? And use that to make an informed decision instead of just saying, this looks like it pays really well if I get to the other side of it, and I'm going to do that. Because, I'm sure we'll get to this, but in my mind, success was, how much money do I make? And, how can I support myself and do these things? I was making decisions based on that, as opposed to making decisions based on really what I was created to be.
Mm-hmm. And going through that, how did you have the perspective to process that internally, where you started thinking about those things rather than maybe just shifting towards success as financial, or just as in your profession, being successful in that, even if it wasn't something you enjoyed?
Well, I think partly kind of going into my actual career, I worked my way up pretty quickly. I excelled at sales, and so kind of found a job that kind of that integrated sales, technology, and then ultimately marketing, which I found was me having an opportunity to be creative and problem solve. And so I got a little bit lucky, and I think that sometimes luck happens when preparation meets opportunity, but there's also dumb luck, and I think I got a little bit of dumb luck.
Yeah.
And what I found was I had the right people around me that kind of saw those things in me, and it started to kind of rise to the top. I'm sorry, what was the question again? I was getting there and I lost it for a second.
Yeah, no, just about how basically in that experience where you failed your aptitude test, how did you have perspective to sit there and say, this could be something that I could keep going with because of this, or I can change my perspective, find something that I'm maybe a little more gifted and talented at that I enjoy.
Yeah. So the stuff I was doing drained me. It was more programming, coding, computer stuff. And I kind of looked at that from the standpoint of, like, if I'm doing this for the next 10 years, I'm going to be excited. Like, I barely made it through 4 years. And it technically wasn't even 4 years because I only specialized in the last 2.
Yeah.
So I was just like, I don't think I want to do that. And the other side of it was the industry was dead. So it's not that the actual industry wouldn't continue on. It has. It's just there wasn't jobs at the time. And so I think that made my decision a lot easier. Mm-hmm. I just remember thinking to myself, I can always sell. Like, there's always going to be a need to sell. I just got to find the right thing to sell. And maybe I can merge together my my technological background that I've gotten from college. Maybe I can merge, some of these things together and then eventually get maybe closer to that. But I didn't know. I mean, I was still shooting in the dark a little bit. And I was inching in the right direction. And I think that first hard conversation with myself of, what am I actually good at? I think that was probably the key to setting me on the right path. Now we have things like Strength Finders and Berkman, and you have things that personality traits and enneagrams and all that other stuff. I had no clue about that stuff. So when I was further along, I actually took a lot of that stuff, and that it was so revealing to me. But at the same time, I was like, man, if I had just known a little bit sooner. So I'm not sure the age group of your audience, but I'm assuming it's kind of your age group, your generation. That stuff right there, as hocusy pocusy as it feels sometimes, or when you hear people talk about, I'm a 6, I'm a 3. Just knowing that about yourself, I think really puts you in a position to where you can make decisions about the direction of your life that you want to go, to things that will fulfill you, to things that are going to encourage you and help you to feel like I'm making a difference. When you get into purpose, words like that are things that you always hear about as a kid, but when you get to a point of like understanding your true purpose and then either operating in your purpose or seeing other people operate in their purpose, to me, that's where success really starts to materialize. That's no longer the, how much is in the bank account? What does my business card say? If I'm able to operate in my purpose and I'm passionate about it, that for me was something that I was like, man, if I can work towards that, then that's where my fulfillment's going to come from. It's not going to be from how much money's in the bank account, because no matter how much is in there, it's not enough. Mm-hmm. I mean, as your possessions and your responsibility and everything grows, so does the stress. And you're just like, man, how much more can I put in there in case it all falls apart? Yeah. The answer is never enough. I mean, it's just never, you just never know. So I would much rather be working towards something that fulfills me, that gives me purpose, and that, I can see God working through. Man, that's the direction that I'm trying to go now. Mm-hmm.
And how can younger people apply that in their life at an earlier age instead of get towards the end of their life and look back and say, oh man, I wish I would have done this at an earlier time?
I don't know about you, but I knew everything once I turned about 16 years old.
Yeah.
I knew it all. And I continued to know it all for the most part until, I took that aptitude test and realized I knew nothing.
Yeah.
So my answer to that question would be that you need to realize very quickly that you don't know anything. And with that comes humility. And with that comes the ability to be vulnerable. Because for me to go to a teacher and learn, or me to go to a mentor and learn, requires me acknowledging that I don't have all the answers and I don't have all the solutions. For me, that is paramount for kind of getting the direction that you want to go. The other side of it is, so I told you in the beginning, I was very independent and self-sufficient. I didn't want to depend on anybody. So I didn't learn that stuff early on, partly because I had enough time and energy to figure it out. And if I were to look at my strengths now, I would say, I'm a problem solver. I'm going to figure out a way. I'm not just going to figure out a way to do it. I'm going to figure out the best way to do it. So I would go do that. Well, if I had a mentor, I could have accelerated that process astronomically. they could have just said, here's the best way to do it. And I think a little bit of pride gets in the way. I think a little self-assurance gets in the way. And I think a little bit of just feeling like you have all the answers, or, this old guy's not going to be able to tell me anything. I think all that stuff just slows you down. And the sooner that you can step back and say, I don't have all the answers, and right now I have enough energy to learn, but if I'm very intentional with what I'm learning, not just trying to figure it out, but how do I get around the right kind of people that I know will get me on the path that I need to go, and just turn into a sponge. That's where it's going to speed up. So the sooner you can figure that out, I think the sooner you'll find, again, more fulfillment in what you're doing. I think you'll get closer and closer to your purpose. And I think you'll just save a lot of time, which, I still classify myself as young.
Yeah.
I just turned 40, but if I figure this out in my 20s, I'm not saying anything would be drastically different. I think I'd have a lot less stress. I'd have a lot more peace. My success would be different. But I just think that so much can happen from that. I think people look at guys like Steph Curry and they just drain threes all the time. Mm-hmm. And you just assume, well, I just need to do that. And then you go out and shoot a basket and you airball it and you're sitting there going, what have I done? Like, I'm horrible at this. Clearly I can't do that because, I look at guys out there and you're focusing on the success and not the journey. Mm-hmm. I think you could learn a ton from Steph Curry, and none of it has to do with basketball.
Absolutely.
See, I'm using some basketball.
Yeah, I like it.
But I think that, just understanding that, I could figure out how to make a 3-pointer and teach myself. I'd rather get around the right kind of guy that can just say, here's what you focus on: aim small, miss small, mm-hmm. mechanics, focus on the fundamentals, like all those things that you hear and you just don't want to do because you're just like, I just want to go out and shoot it, and I just want to go shoot half-court shots all day at practice. Well, you're not actually going to do that in the real world, and you're not going to do that in the game. And so, focus on those fundamentals. There's business fundamentals, there's leadership fundamentals, there's human interaction fundamentals. Man, that stuff will go a long way.
Oh yeah, and it takes so much longer to learn something on your own, and it can be so condensed when you learn from people that are ahead of you or where you want to be. Mm-hmm. And it makes a huge difference. And on the Steph Curry part, where you sit there and we look at success, and that's all we kind of focus on sometimes, but we don't see the preparation and the hours and hours and hours of preparation that's put in to achieve that success. And at the same time, what you're talking about a little bit, if you can learn at an early age about who you are, a little more about your gifts and abilities, because if we all go out there and try to be Steph Curry and shoot like Steph Curry, the majority of us hardly any of us are going to be able to do that, right? Because the abilities that we have are not quite there. Mm-hmm. But if we focus and take things from him, where you're sitting there, you're focused on maximizing the person that you are and the abilities that you have to be the best at whatever those things are, it kind of helps you have that focus. When you start preparing, you're going to be able to maximize your talents and abilities in that way.
Yeah, I think there's a combination between passion and purpose. I think he has a passion for the game, mm-hmm. and it aligns with his purpose. I think if somebody else were to go do that, if I were to go do that and spend that amount of time in the gym, I wouldn't be able to do it because I'd be completely drained.
I thought you were going to say you'd be better than him. So.
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
There's probably other things that I'd be better than him at. I can't remember who said it. If we judge the success of an animal by its ability to fly, tigers and lions and stuff would be absolute failures.
Yeah.
We're not in a situation where the one thing defines you, but I will say that if his purpose is playing basketball and leading on the court, and for him to go spend hours and hours and hours in the gym, and he just wants to be there, he will be better than me all day long. But if there's something that I can do that energizes me, that I enjoy, that I'm passionate about, and I'm tuned into that, look out, because I'll give anybody a run for their money, because that's kind of that extra 2%. I think there's a lot of people that will go really hard and they'll see success, but the guys who it looks effortless to, it's the ones that you can't outwork them because they're energized by the process. They're growing stronger in the adversity where you're potentially growing weaker. And I think that that's where you really need to step back and say, okay, what are the things that bring me life? What are the things that energize me? What are the things that God moves in? Are those things that I've had success in? And if that's the case, then start whittling down towards that. I just completed 1 degree with Dave Jewett, who I know you know, and just gleaning from all of the wisdom and expertise that he has. And he's not saying anything that's just mind-blowing. What he's saying is let's take a 360-degree view of your life. What's the one thing? What's that 1%, that direction that you're, and how do we keep you going in that direction? And for some people, they don't want to spend the time doing it. There's too much stuff going on and they want to try and do everything. Those are people in their 20s, and because they have the time, and they were like me, like, hey, I'll figure it out. Mm-hmm. But I have less time now. I have more responsibility, and I want to be more intentional with that time. So a program like 1 Degree for me is way more attractive because I'm willing to spend that time to make sure that I'm staying in the things that really drive me. And if I'm able to do that, not to say you can't do that when you're young, because for me, when I was young, I need to go out there and I need to just try a bunch of stuff. Not just try the things that I think I'm good at, because I was good at computers and programming and stuff. Not just do those, but find the things that maybe there's a little bit more evidence. And some of that involves going out there and failing. Some of that involves pushing you outside of your comfort zone. A lot of those things involve change. And I think that in a world of safe spaces and especially like people wearing masks and staying home and pandemics, like I think we're being programmed right now to just hide. And I'm not saying that from a medical standpoint, anything. All I'm saying is that you need to get out there and try new stuff and learn to fail successfully, because no time is wasted. Those years in my 20s, my college career was not wasted. It was not a failure. I learned a lot in college. The most important thing I learned was what I didn't want to do with my life.
Yeah.
So was that worth the price of the education? I don't know. But when I go through and identify, like, what are the things that I enjoy doing? What are the things that I think are potentially within my purpose? I have a much larger spectrum to look at, as opposed to, well, I'm really good at playing video games and riding bicycles. Mm-hmm. As much as I want to be a Call of Duty YouTuber, I just don't think that that's going to fit for all people. So get out there and try new stuff. I learned to solve a Rubik's. My 11-year-old taught me how to solve a Rubik's Cube. And this was when I was 39, so because I just recently turned. I actually was of the same mindset. I'm going to figure this out, how to do it. You know how many combinations it takes to solve a Rubik's Cube? It's in like the tens of millions.
Really?
So, again, I have a lot of energy and time. Yeah. I don't have that much time.
Yeah.
So, for him to show me, and he just watched YouTube. That's how he learned. Uh-huh. He learned how to do it and then showed me how to do it. It took me 6 days. And the most frustrating thing is I learned that my son is a horrible teacher. Yeah. He's like, just do this. Yeah. And I'm like, no, that's not going to work. I was like, what's step one? And for me, I probably could have gone my whole life not learning how to solve a Rubik's Cube. But it taught me that I can still learn stuff. It taught me that it was still uncomfortable. The payoff's really not that great, except to say that I know how to do it.
Yeah.
But man, it's like so fun to just sit there and just know that whatever it's mixed up to, I can solve it.
Yeah.
And that is just such a crazy little thing, but it was just kind of reminding me, just keep getting out there. I failed a ton of times. I got to step 7 and I screwed up one thing and I had to start over again. Yeah. And that is so frustrating, but I chose not to. I knew when I was, going again, I was like, okay, I made that mistake 3 times, what am I, okay, I was turning this way instead of that way. And the more repetition you have with it, your brain just picks it up. When you're young, man, it picks it up so much faster, and it's not as hardwired. I mean, he's solving it without moving it. I'm like doing this, and I'm like moving here. Yeah. It's just, I'm sure if I spent the time, I could figure out how to do it that way, but I really don't care anymore. I just wanted to solve it. But, for me, it was just learning it's okay to fail. It's okay to try new things. And for me, the process of learning to solve it was really, really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you'll find is not just in the things that you're doing, sitting back and going, okay, like, am I going to make a ton of money doing this? I'm not going to make any money solving Rubik's Cubes.
Yeah.
Unless I'm like a speed cuber, which is a thing I found out.
Really? Okay.
But for me, it was like, okay, I enjoy problem solving. I enjoy sitting back and looking at, this jumbled mess of colors in a cube, and then learning how it moves and what the combinations do and what is that telling me. And like when I get to here, what do I do next? And it's just that problem solving part of it. I could spend a couple hours doing a Rubik's Cube, learning how to do a Rubik's Cube, and I wasn't exhausted. I sat back and I was like, I would literally like wake up thinking about it, and just thinking about the combinations of the moves. And, for me, that was like kind of a clue. It was like, okay, this is like a driver for me. It's something that I enjoy doing that if I can spend more time doing things like that, I'll be energized. I'm working in my purpose, and I'm solving a problem. But a lot of times when you solve a problem, people are willing to pay you to do that. And now we're talking. Now we're going the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what, there's a quote that says success leaves clues.
Yes.
But also I would say that experiences also leave clues too.
Mm-hmm. Just
what you talked about, going back and looking into those experiences that you've had, just as simple as a Rubik's Cube. Would you say that you're a naturally curious person?
I would say that I'm not a naturally curious person.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I'll say that my curiosity is awakened when I see other people that are passionate about things. Which sounds really weird when you say it that way.
No, it makes sense though.
But if I walked up to a World War II statue and I just looked at it, I'd be like, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody did something wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody saved a bunch of lives. But if I have somebody there who loves World War II history, and they're talking about the battles, and they're talking about this person in particular and what they did, and the adversity that they overcome, the things that they did, and the climate at the time, and what was going on, and the guns that they had to use, and the way that you communicated. And now I'm interested. Now I'm curious. But if I were to just look at that, I would go, okay, move on. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. But when I'm around people that are passionate about certain things, my curiosity goes crazy. Because then I'm like, tell me more. I want to know. That's why it's dangerous for me to get on YouTube. Because there's a lot of junk in there, but there's also some really cool stuff. And you can learn how to do anything. Like right now, my house sits in what used to be a pasture. It's my yard now. And there are YouTube channels of people that will teach me how to turn it into a golf course if I want to.
Yeah.
And I am all sorts of curious about that.
Uh-huh.
But I would not have been if the guy was just like, here are the chemicals, spray them, you're done. I mean, these guys are a little eccentric, and they are nerding out about how to make it's called lawn domination.
Okay.
Where you dominate your neighbor and just embarrass them because their yard is a mess compared to yours.
Uh-huh.
I'm in on that. I want to dominate my neighbor's yards. And so, of course, I've spent stupid amounts of money and time figuring out how to do that. And so that's what's awakened my curiosity.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask that too, because you started your podcast, the Young Business Leader podcast, and you got to interview a lot of different people.
Yeah.
People from Governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, right? People in Chick-Fil-A, people in Hobby Lobby, all these different people. And there's so many lessons that you just talked about that you probably heard as patterns through those stories maybe.
Yeah.
And how did that even come about? Like, how did the podcast come about for you, saying this is something I want to do?
Yeah, it really came from me solving a problem. At the time, it was with the Young Businessmen of Tulsa, and they had a monthly lunch, and I was part of the leadership there, and essentially the speaker has 25 minutes to speak, which is not a lot of time.
Yeah.
And the speaker usually has to get like a signal that it's time to wrap it up. Well, I was the guy that had to give the signal. So I'm in the back, and this guy's going, and I can't remember who it was. And I was like, oh man, this is really good stuff. Like,
Yeah.
this is great. And I look at my watch and I'm like, he needs to end.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to be past time. We want to be respectful of everybody's time. It's during lunch, during a work day. So I was like, crap. So I'm like, 5 minutes, like, let's go. And he's like, oh, okay. And I can see him. He's got his papers right there. And, I just inch my way closer and closer to him, kind of letting him know. Well, the guy had like 8 pages of notes, and he was on page 2.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there going, there's a lot of really good information here that I think people need to hear. I was like, I'm just going to start like a podcast where we share the recordings of the luncheon, but then, if the speaker doesn't have time to finish their thoughts, like, we can create an opportunity for them to do that. So that was kind of the idea behind it. And it just kind of grew and grew and grew to the point where I was doing a weekly podcast and I did it weekly for about 3 years, I think. It was a long time. And so one of those weeks was just recording from the lunch, and then the other 3 were guests that I would get. And then eventually, it kind of, like, as we were doing it more and more, I realized that success and some of the leadership principles we were talking to were not localized to Tulsa. And they were not, gender specific. And so that's why I wanted to take a step back and say, okay, we're hitting on a lot of great stuff, and I don't want people to potentially miss out on the content because it's a Young Businessmen of Tulsa thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I switched it over to the Young Business Leader podcast. But that's kind of the birth of it. It's kind of come and gone a little bit. I've switched over to helping out with a men's ministry for Church on the Move called Brotherhood, and I've kind of shifted my focus over there. Not saying that the Young Business Leader podcast, won't start back up again, because I have toyed around with the idea of it. I just want to kind of maybe tweak it a little bit, because going at a weekly pace was pretty intense.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I learned so much from that. I had an opportunity to speak with some really amazing people, and I learned a ton in it. So if nobody listened, which I know that people did listen, but if nobody listened, I was better because of it. And on the other side of it, it created some great opportunities. It created some great relationships. And so it was a fun ride. And again, no time is wasted when you're doing stuff like that, because even though if I only had 2 people listen to it, me, probably my mom, and like maybe one other person, it didn't matter, because it was educational, and I think I became a better speaker because of it. I was able to think a lot quicker. I think I was a better communicator at that point. So man, it checked a lot of boxes, and I think it still does. So that's why I continue to do it. Just it's changed a little bit since then.
Mm-hmm. Who are some of your favorite guests that you had on the podcast?
Man, you had Gabe Sherman,
Mm-hmm.
I believe. Gabe Sherman was a great guest. He's an awesome dude. Love him. Justin Wren, who is with Fight for the Forgotten. I heard him originally on a Joe Rogan podcast, and I was like, man, this guy's cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to a faith and business thing, and there he was speaking, and I was like, this is amazing. So I was able to have him on. He did some stuff with Jazzco, a guy named Steve Trice, who, from a leadership standpoint, just the things that he does in terms of like kingdom business, in terms of how can I make sure that I put people first and reflect Christ to them. Jazzco does a fantastic job of that. Obviously, talking to Mart, Cathy at Fil-A, that was really cool. I always talk about Mart and Frey. He's the guy that's climbed He's climbed the 7 summits and sailed the 7 seas. So he's climbed the highest peak on every continent, and he's sailed every ocean. And he's also, since then, been to the North Pole and the South Pole. So he's dubbed the world's most adventurous man.
Yeah.
So that was just incredible. Just when you think of setting audacious goals and doing and pushing yourself beyond what you think you're capable of, he's the most unsuspecting, chill guy I've ever met. And I was like, man, tell me about, you're climbing Everest, and, you hear the stories about just the struggle and all that other stuff. What's going through your mind at that point? And he's like, I was just quoting a poem to myself, or, I was just kind of thinking through it. I'm like, okay. So then I later on went and I climbed a 14er in Colorado. I was not thinking of a poem.
Yeah.
I was like, I shouldn't be here. This is the dumbest thing I've ever done. I'm gonna get hurt. Like that's what was going through my mind, and I'm on like not necessarily an untechnical climb, but compared to what he did, dude was so chill. He was just quoting like little like haikus to himself. That was incredible. So a lot of great stuff. Paul Wizakowski is another one that he actually worked with Gabe Sherman over at NASA. But not like a big name or anything, but what we talked about was that my path is not your path. And that for me was a really important podcast in the sense of recognizing that I can't compare my success to other people's success. I can't look at, whether it be people my age or people that I, live with or that are in my community or whatever. I can't always compare myself to where they're at and say, what the heck's wrong with me? I just have to recognize that I'm on my own path and they're on their own path. And that when things come up, if they're successful, that I can celebrate with them, and then just know that my opportunity's coming. Or when I have success, remember to bring people along with me. And it was just a really powerful conversation to just kind of go through that and just get a little vulnerable, a little raw about just the struggles of just being a leader and having a family and seeing other people's success around you and going, that guy doesn't deserve, like, how in the world did that guy, do this, and I'm sitting here and working my butt off, and I'm just not seeing it yet.
Yeah.
And just having the freedom to step back from that and say, you know what, if that person's operating in their gifts and they're operating within their purpose, of course that success is going to come to them. My job is to find my purpose and find my path to success and pursue that, and ultimately reflect Christ in the entire process. If I can do those things, that's where success truly lies. So, man, some of those just deeper conversations were so great. It didn't have to be a huge name. It was, some of the standard conversations were, in my opinion, some of the most impactful.
Yeah, and how did you connect with all these different people? I mean, some were speakers from...
Yeah. So YBT helped just because, having an association name that had a website and had a little bit of notoriety, that helped. But over time, it was just kind of pointing back to the consistency of the podcast and and hitting on some of the messages that we wanted to communicate. But many of the people that I talked to were in a phase of life that they were ready to give back, and so just me being a younger guy pursuing them and just saying, hey, I want to talk about these things. I talked to Jim Stovall, and he's blind. But I did the podcast in his office, and it was so funny because as I was talking about certain things, I could tell when I struck a chord with him or there's something that he really connected with because he just lit up. And it was the coolest thing. I was like, Jim doesn't have to do this for me. Like, he's got a ton of other things that he can do. He gets paid a lot of money to go speak and share his wisdom, and he was willing to spend the time with me just because I was hungry and I wanted to learn, and I was really connecting to some of the things that I think probably he's been saying for a long time, but for me it was fresh and it was new, and I just wanted to share that with others. And once I was able to communicate that, I think the purpose was the other reason that I was able to get some of the guests that I was. I was born in 1981, and so I'm technically a millennial. That group keeps getting bigger and bigger, it seems like. So, but they've kind of settled on like 1980. So I'm one of the oldest millennials, and I kept at first I thought I was a Gen Xer, and I was just like, those stupid millennials, they can't even figure, they all want participation trophies and things to be given to them. And as I got further into it, I just realized, I was like, they're gonna start putting me in this group. Like, I gotta do something about this. So the other part of it was just kind of saying like, hey, if I'm gonna be a millennial, if that's the label that someone's going to put on me, then I'm going to define what it is. And I think just kind of taking some of those steps to say, like, we're not victims. We are going to take ownership of who we are. We've seen a lot, and life, for our perspective of life is different. Just like, kids growing up now, if I'm younger through a pandemic, I never had to go through a pandemic, and so for kids these days, they feel like the world could end at any moment. So that changes your outlook in life. That changes some of the things, and that will ultimately shape how they make decisions. And so for us, it was like, September 11th, it was, the birth of the internet. It was all these other things from a technology standpoint that kind of allowed us to see just this huge amount of growth, this connectivity, this information that's available, and then also this amount of tragedy that can happen. And so I just said, you know what, let's find a way to figure this all out. And the crazy thing was we were raised by the previous generation, and their generation was completely different too. It was a bunch of hippies. And they're just trying to figure it out. And, no fault of their own, they did the best they could. So, now it's up to us. We got to take responsibility for who we are. And the podcast was my attempt to kind of reshape culture a little bit. So I think I did it. I don't have a big enough audience to say that it really impacted anything, but who knows when they're digging up the ancient ruins of Tulsa and they come across the Tulsa internet. And they find my podcast, they'll be like, oh, look at what they were trying to do back then. It was such a primitive being.
No, I think obviously you've it wasn't just a small podcast. There were a lot of listeners to it. But you went out with the intent also just to help people. I think that was kind of the theme, is you want to help people learn and grow and become better leaders. And so speaking on that part, was it pretty fun and rewarding? Did you get any people reaching out to you about, something that impacted them through a show, or what was that like through those conversations?
I did have people reach out. It was crazy because when I was doing them once a week, there was so much content that I had to almost step back when people would talk about an episode, because it would take a little bit. And I learned from guys like John Lee Dumas, who he was doing a daily podcast at times. So I don't even know how. I don't even know how he kept up with all that. He since changed it, but that was his thing, and he grew it, and it became this massive thing. But they would come and talk about, man, tell me about this, and like I would be able to go a little bit deeper in the conversation with it, and just kind of it would become new to me again, because as I'm talking about it, I'm sitting there going, oh man, I remember thinking this, or I remember editing it, and at that point I'd listen to it a couple times just to make sure that there was no technological issues or anything like that. But it was just cool because it became its own thing, and then I could have conversations with them about their leadership journey and some of the experiences that they've had. And sometimes it was just like, what is he like? What is that person like? And other times it was, man, I've dealt with the imposter syndrome, and I know that it's really dangerous, and it's nice to know that I'm not the only one that deals with something like that. And that, for me, that was cool, because it just created an opportunity for a relationship. And I think that through my journey, for a lot of the things that I've done, I've recognized that if I'm the guy that never is vulnerable, never shows weakness, never doesn't have the answer, I'm not relatable. And the podcast was an opportunity for me to be a little bit more relatable, to let that guard down a little bit, and ultimately build relationships. Because some of the best relationships you have are when you walk through adversity together, when you do fail. The people that are there to help you through that, you have better relationships as a result of that. I always try to avoid those things. I always, if something was going wrong, I wouldn't tell anybody about it, because then I'm a failure, and I don't want you to think I'm a failure. I want you to think that I know all the answers. And that was flawed, because whenever I was in a situation where I didn't have all the answers, I didn't have anybody around. I didn't have the kinds of relationships that I needed. And so for me, the podcast was a way to open myself up a little bit, but hopefully encourage other people too, to say, words like vulnerability are foreign to guys. We're supposed to be the macho men. We're supposed to, just go running into the burning building. And for me, it was like, to be vulnerable and to have empathy, man, those are two really foreign things for me. I still struggle with empathy. I'm not very empathetic. I'm becoming more so, just because I'm like starting to understand. But man, I was a tough love guy. Like, hey, suck it up. Why can't you be like me and figure it out on your own? And then I realized, well, I didn't have it figured out either. So I should give him a little grace.
For sure. So going back a little bit to the podcast, you talked about where it was focused on comparison. And you saying that was one of your favorites that you've been through. Why is it so hard to not compare in our culture? And just from an early age, I think many people compare. Even later on, people compare. How do you get past that? How do you focus on, yourself and not comparing yourself to other people?
Well, I've thought about this a little bit, and I think that comparing is natural to us because we're used to having a scoreboard. We're used to having some sort of way to figure out who's winning and who's losing. And so, growing up, it could be academics, it could be grades, it could be sports, it could be, a game that you play. And you're constantly looking at the scoreboard saying, okay, I'm winning, you're losing, or we're tied right now, or this is how much I need to overcome to get to this certain place. And so I think it becomes intrinsic, and I think we're just naturally competitive. I think, we see people around us, and you're like, I'm better looking than that guy, or like I'm smarter than him. Like I think that all those things kind of race through our heads because we want to be wanted, and who are the people that are most wanted? The ones that are winners, the ones that are successful. And so I think it's just natural to want to do that. But I think that when you get to past college and you get into a career, the scoreboard changes, it goes away. It's not visible anymore. It's visible based on maybe the clothes that you wear or the house that you have or the title on your business card or how much money you have on the bank. I've heard this, there's some of the industries that I'm in, the people that are the presidents or the founders of those industries, they're billionaires. And often I've had conversations of like, what's the point when you're a billionaire? Like, it's great. I have $1 billion. I will probably never be able to spend all of the multiple billions or single $1 billion that you have. It's a lot of money.
It's a lot, yeah.
So like, why do they keep pushing? Why do they keep pursuing? And multiple people have told me that's their scoreboard. They want to be this kind of billionaire. And there's continuing to be different levels. I found out very quickly when I went to Las Vegas that I am like really low on the levels. Like I thought I was doing pretty good. Like I had a house, I had 2 cars, I had kids, I had a good job, I had the title, and I went to Vegas and was like, I don't even want to walk in that store. I think it's going to cost money to walk in that store. I don't want to do it. And it's just, the scoreboard just changes. And so you're constantly trying to figure out like, what is success and how do I compare it on that spectrum of success? And so, from the beginning of just looking up and saying, here's where I am, to now looking up going, I have no idea where I am. And for guys, I think we put a lot of our identity into our success. Mm-hmm. I've heard the analogy of, part of the first conversation I have with another guy is, what do you do? Like, that tells me a lot about you. That's going to tell me if you're successful or if you're not successful. So I'm instantly sizing you up as soon as I ask that question. And, if he's like, hey, I'm a garbage man, I'll be like, hey, buddy, great to meet you. I'll see you later. I'm going to go talk to somebody else, which is horrible. But
it honestly is true. It honestly is true. I mean, that's the way the world kind of works.
It is. So I think what needs to happen is at some point you need to kind of say, okay, what is my scoreboard? What is the thing that I'm going to measure as success? For me, in the beginning, it was financial and title. I mean, those were the 2 things. Here's the downfall to that. Title is easy. I can make you the president or CEO of whatever company you want to start. Mm-hmm. That one's an easy one to get. To do it for a long period of time is a little bit more difficult, but a title doesn't mean anything. That's why you look at business cards now and it's like marketing ninja. What does that mean? It's like you just making up your own title. But from the other side of it, from a financial standpoint, when you have money in the bank, that could be a part of success. But if you're like in business, like your P&L, your financials, this month we had a bad month. Am I still a success or am I a failure? Maybe out of 2-3 months of just breaking even or losing money and having to put money back into the business. Am I a success or am I a failure? I think that multiple people would differ on their opinion of that person, whether or not they're a success or not. Some would say that you're a success because you're continuing to build something. Mm-hmm. Others would say you're a failure because you've lost money.
Sure.
So
There's all this different ideas going around.
Right. And then when you talk about your identity is in your success, your identity is in what you do. If you have a bad couple of months, there's literally right now, post-COVID, which pre-post-COVID, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of businesses that were failures last year. Through no fault of their own, they were failures from a financial standpoint. They had to take money from the government. They probably sold less than they've sold in a very long time. Are those businesses failures? No. There were some circumstantial things that came into play, and how they navigated that. To me, if you survived that, you are a success.
Yeah.
But my definition of success is different. So I think part of that is just removing your identity from the financial part of success, and then redefining success. So for success would be, for me, spending time with, the amount of time that I can spend with my family. It would be, do my children feel comfortable that they can share their struggles with me? We can have those tough conversations, and they're willing to share it. Success for me would be, my employees, do they enjoy their work? Do they feel like they're a part of something that is bigger than what they are? Do I have the right people in the right place? Am I understanding their gifts and talents and putting them in an opportunity for success, or am I putting them in an opportunity where they're just going to be frustrated and drained and ultimately leave the company? Mm-hmm. So all of those different things come into play. Obviously, I got to pay my bills. But for me, success is different. Does my wife love me? The amount of years that you're married. I have a friend that says he's been married for 13 years, happily married for 3, but been married for 13 years. I don't want to be the guy that says I've been happily married for 3. I want to be the guy that says I've been happily married all the years. And I think that part of that is, taking the time to invest in your marriage. And so success is different for a lot of people, but I think when you can start removing some of the superficial, what I think success should be from your definition of success, then I think you're going to have a lot more fulfillment no matter what phase of life you're in. Even if you're just out of college and you're getting coffee for people, you can be a success in that. But it's recognizing, okay, what does success look like for me today? But also, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? And then am I working towards that? If I'm working towards that, then I'm a success. If I'm stagnant, if I'm on a plateau, and if I'm not working in that direction, I might be a failure at that point. And that's okay. It's okay to fail. I can learn from that failure and say, okay, I spent this time doing this. It's not getting me any closer to what I need to do. All right, it's time to reevaluate, readjust, and relaunch. And that's where we need to go, and that can make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. So how would you say excellence differs from success?
Well, it depends on, again, how you define success.
Sure.
But on the face value, I think excellence is, for me, it's the extra mile. So, I can do something well. If you want to buy a marketing campaign from me and I complete that marketing campaign and it does what it's supposed to do, to me that's not excellence. That's just checking a box of, I wanted to do direct mail, we did direct mail, and everything went out like it was supposed to. Doing it with excellence would be, what am I doing above and beyond to make sure that it is as successful as it possibly can be? So in that example, it would be, are we targeting correctly? Are we able to apply the right kind of postal discounts to make sure that we're getting the most amount of pieces out for the marketing spend? From a design standpoint, is it attractive? Is it drawing the attention in the right places? And really kind of looking past maybe what the customer wants to anticipating what they want and helping them through that. Because a lot of times they don't know what they want. They want a bunch of phone calls, or they want a bunch of business, or they want X, Y, and Z. Yes. But if I get you a bunch of phone calls, but nobody can afford your product, was that a success?
No.
I don't think so. So I think part of that doing things with excellence is really going above and beyond for that customer, going above and beyond in whatever instance of what you're talking about doing, and providing that in such a way that somebody steps back and goes, wow, you didn't have to do that, but you did. Wow, I didn't expect that. I think excellence kind of starts pushing into that territory. And then there's obviously quality tied to it, which I think is interwoven into that entire thing. Quality and cheap don't go well together. So at some point you do need to make a decision, but I think I can go above and beyond on a price point product and still provide excellence, but also not spend all my time on that to where it wasn't worth it for me to do it. So I think it's a little bit of a thin line, but I think it's something that you have to sit down and for yourself decide.
Yeah.
What is doing this with that excellence look like for my situation? Because I think it'll vary in a lot of instances.
Yeah, or even like what is personal excellence? What's excellence like to be a father, to be a husband? Obviously, you talked about being a business person right there.
Yeah.
In your faith, what does that look like? And it's really important because excellence and success, like it depends on the person, but it's about what you said, being the best you can do and doing the best you can do, but also going above and beyond to make it as good as it can be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that going back to some of the other things, excellence and success, there's a lot of factors to that, but there's people that are just interwoven into that entire thing. And I think sometimes it's just seeing a person for who they are, listening to them, taking the time. I mean, spending time with a person could be all the excellence you need, and just hearing what they have to say. I've run into countless situations where I've had customers that have left other companies that are my competition and come to do stuff with us just because they didn't feel heard, just because they didn't feel like the person they were working with cared. And how do I convey care? Time. And I think that, if I say whatever, like if I'm just going to work on this one thing today and it's going to be here working through this with you, that I'm willing to do that, that's doing stuff with excellence. And I think that people can tell that you care, they can tell that you want, their best interest, or they can tell when you don't. And if you're able to do that, I think that is a great way to convey excellence. And it's a great way to just look at all situations. It's just recognizing that the people element that's a part of everything. If you can understand people, you're going to be successful in a lot of things.
Yeah. Some people are tough to understand, but
they can be. But I think also if you take that time to kind of see where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you can solve a person unless they're just like mentally unstable. Then all bets are off. But like the more I understand a person, that's where my empathy that I suck at comes in. Like now I'm not impatient with you. Now I have compassion for you because I recognize that you're an idiot and you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think that the empathy wore off about halfway through that sentence.
Yeah.
I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I was just joking, but it's so important. Just a simple action like caring for somebody makes a difference. Giving them time makes a difference, like you talked about. And speaking of that, going back a little bit to your family, being a husband and a father, what are some things that you think are really important to do for your wife, for your kids? I know we've talked a lot about a lot of things on here, but the care and the time, just something as simple as that. What does that look like for you now with 2 young boys that are growing up, a wife you've been married to for a long time? How do you stay consistent in that? And what do you do to try to push yourself to be better in that?
Yeah, this is a dangerous conversation because whatever I say here, if it gets back to them, I'm really held accountable.
Yeah.
For my wife and my kids, again, time is huge. What I found is that if I'm in the room with you, but I'm not paying attention to you, that doesn't count as time. That's a little gold nugget for you.
Yeah.
So if I'm watching a game and she's sitting right here, doesn't count. Even though it's like, 4-hour football game, we've spent 0 time together.
Not necessarily quality time. Yeah.
Really frustrating. If I'm in the car with you and you're sitting next to me, 0 time. So I think that, partly just understanding their needs. I'm going to recommend a book here because this is something that has awakened a lot for me. It's a book called Love and Respect, which I think I've talked to you about.
Mm-hmm.
Women need love and men need respect. And that is the title of the book. And you still need to read it, but that's the gist of it. But I think if you understand what love means to your wife, and if you're able to give her that, man, you're going to have a ton of success right there. Because when you get married, there's a celebration happening, but there's also a funeral happening. And I don't know if you're aware of that. The celebration is that you're starting a new life with somebody, and that's awesome. You have all the potential in the world, and it's kind of like what we've been programmed to work towards, right? Grow up, graduate, get married, have kids, retire and die. I think that's pretty much all the high points. I'm on the retire and die part. I think that's all I got left to do. But the funeral part of it is your selfish ambitions dies at that point. And that is really depressing. But what I found is the guys that I would say have struggled in their marriage are still pursuing the things that they pursued before they were married. And not to say that I've, just totally given up on my dreams.
Sure.
But recognizing that, I've had my time as a young man to really kind of be and go do what I want to do. Stay up late, go play a ton of golf, go to the lake, go on a ski trip, just go do all this fun stuff, play video games all night long. That was my time to do that. And when I've gotten married, now I have to make sure that person is fulfilled. And so the only way to do it, they're not going to fulfill themselves. I was essentially created to fulfill her needs, and she was created to fulfill my needs. And the way to do that is to constantly pour into her. And what will happen, and what Love and Respect talks about, is when you fill up her love tank, she will naturally reciprocate back. If her love tank is empty, what she will do is she will be disrespectful to you, and you need respect. So she's going to give you the opposite response of what you need in order to motivate you to be more loving to her. And I call that hugging the cactus. You basically become the most horrible version of yourself. And I'm supposed to go, oh, I don't like it when my wife is this way. I'm now going to act very lovingly to her. That is really foreign to me, and it's foreign to a lot of people. So it's counterintuitive, but that's how we work. The other thing is, I know that she needs love, or maybe I don't know that she needs love. I'm not going to give her love if she's disrespectful to me. So they call it the crazy cycle, and essentially it's what a lot of people do in their relationships, and they don't know that they're doing it. And the next thing they know, they're frustrated because they're like, man, I'm just not happy in this marriage. It sucks. I'm just getting, absolutely destroyed. And the book actually addresses when some people are like, oh man, I was blindsided because I got divorced because everything was great. Well, everything was great because she stopped being disrespectful for you, because she stopped caring. And when you can recognize that when she's confronting you and when she's kind of pushing you, it's because she cares, and the things that you do naturally to kind of say, well, I care, therefore I'm not going to fight with you. It's this crazy cycle. So read the book. It's great. But the book gives you something called the energizing cycle. And the energizing cycle is something that will help you get off of that crazy cycle and help start pouring into her needs and giving her the things that she needs. And when you do that, that's when you start to see the fruit. That's when you start to see that scoreboard start going up, because it's not super difficult. It's just things that we would not think of. We would think, I'm going to buy you a nice car. That's an expression of my love. And she's going to go, we can't afford this. Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And, well, if you have that much money, then I'm going to go buy this. And you're like, no, that car was for you. That was a major sacrifice. Instead, this is the thing that blows my mind. I was at an event, and they had these little postcards, and the people said, hey, just, put an address of whoever you want to, and just mail, we'll pay for the postage. I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I just write, thinking of you, And I put my home address and my wife's name on there and mailed it to her. This was like 4 or 5 years ago.
Uh-huh.
That postcard is still by her nightstand.
Really?
And she's hung on to that. And the reason that she likes it, from what I understand, is that I was thinking about her during my day. And that filled her low tank. And it didn't cost me anything to do it. But I was able to pour into her just by saying, I'm thinking about you right now. And that's what she needed. And that's what she needs. I need different things. She needs different things. But if you can understand those energizing things, man, you'll have a really, really healthy relationship. And the same thing with your kids. Your kids just want your approval. They just want you to, they want you to watch them. They want your attention. Like my son, he has a little dirt bike, and he wants me to watch him take it over a jump. He wants me to watch him drive around. He wants me to play basketball with him. They just, my oldest son loves fishing. If I'm just in the boat with him, now that time counts. If I'm in a boat and we're both fishing and we're not even looking at each other, that counts as like a full day together. We went hunting, counts as a full day together. My wife, 0 time. But for them, it's huge. And they just want somebody who believes in them, who cares about them. They want their approval. I don't have daughters, but from what I've learned, young girls are just looking for that approval of their father. And if they don't get that, they're going to look someplace else. And that's where it just gets off the rails. And so just be there for your kids, spend the time, and invest in them. And you're going to see a ton of success just from doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things too on the spouse part, there's a lot of really good things about understanding your spouse and knowing who she is, the things that she enjoys, like you talked about. Like the 5 love languages is a good book as well on that. Yep. And, there's words of affirmation, acts of service, physical touch. And you start to gain some clarity on who that person is kind of behind the scenes, even though you're with them every day. You kind of knew that before, but you kind of really hone in on some things that make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Like the quality time. That's something that my wife is like too. Need to have quality time. If we're sitting watching TV, that's not quality time. We have to be talking, doing something intentional. Whereas I just went to Nashville to watch my cousin graduate from Vanderbilt, and my dad and I just went on a little trip. Yeah. And we had a great time. But we can sit in a car and not talk. But there's something about the presence of like your father, and every kid's different. But going back to what you just said, going fishing, just fishing, being together, that's something that I feel like, at least from my perspective, that I really enjoyed. That little time. Obviously we talk, but it was so important just being there, being present. Mm-hmm. Always being around is really important as a father. And another thing I think about as a parent that you talked about earlier is just the example that you set. Like, I remember for my dad, he's not necessarily a guy who he's going to be talking about all the things that you should be doing. He's more just a guy who just lives it and sets the example. And so I watched that at a young age and was able to follow that. And it just reminds me that our example is so powerful. And so when you talk about passion and purpose and the people that live that, kind of you're attracted to, that's such a great example for your kids to watch. Mm-hmm. Being someone that's passionate and purposeful in what they do in their work, in their relationships, in their faith. Like that speaks for itself, And so how do you identify, like how can you find things you're passionate about, understanding a purpose? Because when you focus on those things, you don't always stray away from comparing yourself to other people. You don't always stray away from looking down the road where you want to be. So I guess to sum it all up, how do people kind of funnel themselves into understanding that? You talk about your 1 degree, but identifying some things that they're passionate about and then starting to pursue those things and live with intentionality in their life.
Yeah, I think 1 degree is a really, really good way to do that. But I will say this, 1 degree for somebody in their 20s is difficult. Just because I don't think you've had enough time to live out some experiences and try new stuff. So if you're just out of college, or in high school and college, now's the time to just go try a bunch of stuff. Go fail, go succeed, just put yourself out there. And that's going to hopefully be an opportunity for a little bit later on for you to look back and say, okay, I enjoyed these things, I was successful in these things, whether it be, I made a lot of money, or had a lot of great relationships, or, man, I never even felt like I was working because, like, I was just constantly doing what I love. Like, that kind of stuff is just a lot of, I want to say criteria, but it's a lot of just fuel for narrowing into that 1 degree, because the other side of 1 degree is if you've only been going in one direction, then you don't know what the other 360 or 359 degrees are.
Absolutely, that's a great point.
So you need to go out there and do that. The other thing was, in my talking with Dave Jewett, was understanding the concept of a home run. And so he would basically kind of talk about, like, when you were operating your drivers, you would see these things that would be a home run. And that was a difficult one for me to kind of get my head around, because I'm just like, all right, a home run is like a grand slam home run. Like, it's, we win the game, it's a walk off, like it's this huge thing. And so I was looking for these just massive things. It's like, okay, a home run would be, I make $1 million. Okay, I haven't done that yet. So 0 home runs. A home run would be like, having a huge amount of success in my business, and just having no adversity, no struggles. Nope, haven't had that either. So I was like, I don't have any home runs, this sucks. But when I kind of stepped back from it a little bit, I looked at my relationship with my kids in relation to my drivers. And so, like, when you go through 1 degree and you kind of narrow that stuff down, I was able to attribute a lot of the success and the relationship that I have with them as a home run. Because I recognize that many of my drivers, whether it be problem solving, whether it be influencing, whether it be teaching and guiding, those are all things that I was able to do with my kids. And I don't know how to say it. Like, I'm not trying to brag. It's just like, I get compliments about my kids. I feel like I have a good relationship with my kids, and so, like, I'm like, okay, that's a home run for me. That's something where, they're just not quite teenagers yet. I got a teenager now, so I could screw this whole thing up still. Yeah. But so far, like, I'm able to, like, ask them questions, and I'm able to talk to them like adults, like people. It's not I'm not their friend, I'm not their buddy. Like, I want them to be successful, but they want me to be proud of them. And so, I'm constantly working with that. So I'm like, okay, that's for me what a home run looks like. All right, now how do I translate that to other stuff? And so, kind of going back to that big question of, like, how do I find my purpose? How do I find the things that I'm passionate about? I'll say that I'm still working on that. And part of it is, like, taking your drivers, your things that you're passionate about, that you think you're passionate about, for a test drive. And just going through them, you're like, okay, I say that I like problem solving. Let's put a problem in front of me and see what happens. And if I start doing it, I'm like, this sucks. Like, this is horrible. What am I doing? Maybe that's not a driver for me. But, like I said, with the Rubik's Cube, like, it bothered me that I didn't know it. But it wasn't something where I was just, like, completely drained. Like, my subconscious was working. Like, I'd be going to bed, or I'd be driving, and I'm thinking, up, left, right, left, down, right. Yeah. Like, all the different, like, codes and, like, how you do them. And I'm just sitting there going, okay. And then I'm thinking about how he's doing. I'm like, well, he's not doing those. He's doing something else. And then I'm like, there's multiple ways to solve this. I just got to figure out this one way. But
it's constant.
Like, I might just kind of figure out, like, something that, like, if I'm here at this step. So it just kind of, like, churns and churns. And the next thing you know, when I'm in front of the Rubik's Cube, I'm already halfway through the process, or I've anticipated the thing. And I'm like, okay, like, those things are things that are pointing me to, like, this is something that energizes me. Like, my subconscious is trying to do this thing without me even trying. And, obviously tie success into that, some of the natural things that you'll see, and those things will start rising to the top. But I think part of it is just really acknowledging that you were created for a purpose, acknowledging that there are specific things that you're good at, and there's also specific things that you're horrible at, and then recognizing the difference between something that you're good at and something that you are really enjoy doing and that brings you life. And I would just attribute it to, if I do this am I worn out? Or if I do this, am I energized? And the ones that I'm energized in, those are the ones I'm going to start tracking towards, because that's going to start getting me closer and closer to that purpose.
What would you say if someone's in a job or something that they just feel not energized, they're always struggling, maybe stressed out? How do you get out of that and being in that situation?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, because especially when we go back to when people think that their job is their identity and everything else, like that's almost like a whole nother podcast. But I would say this: if you can start figuring out what your drivers are, there are probably things in your job right now that you can do that are more aligned with your drivers and more that you can really spend a lot of your time on, and then potentially delegate or go to your manager or whoever else and be like, hey man, these are the things I really recognize that I need to focus on. These are the things I don't. If you have a good leader, or if you have good leadership, maybe they may even take you through your strength finders, or they might take you through some of the things that that like, these are the things that I'm really good at, your enneagrams or whatever else, because if they've done a good job building a team, then they are going to put different people in different places and assign different things that are going to energize people. For example, my VP of sales, he's an idea guy. And I didn't know that until I got into a strength finders with him. It's called ideation. That's one of his strengths. So now, instead of me trying to come up with all these ideas, I just say, hey, Greg, here's what we need to do. Give me a bunch of ideas. And he's like, got it. And he'll just, crank a bunch of stuff out. And next thing I know, he comes back at me. Now, I'm a problem solver, and so I'm going to pick one of those ideas to solve the problem.
Yeah.
But I know that I can hand that part off to him. I had another person that, their strength was more like guiding people in terms of like, teaching people how to do stuff. And so I was like, okay, I need to put this person in this position over here to do that. So if you have that opportunity and you have that kind of leadership, go for that. If you're the leader, by all means, try to figure out like the things that you're best at and then delegate the rest. If you're in a situation where you don't have that option, get your head up and start looking, because you're capable of way more than you think. So you can be in a crappy situation for a long time, but you need to start getting a plan to start working towards something else, because your family's going to pay the price, your kids are going to pay the price, your company is going to pay the price. Everybody's going to suffer because you're not operating in what you were designed to be, and nobody wants to be around that.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the biggest keys, is when that happens, it's a trickle-down effect to all those around you.
It doesn't feel like it, but over time you'll be like, man, I'm just grumpy all the time.
Yeah.
Or, why do I hate my job? And why does everybody at work hate me? I don't know. Well, it's possible that you're not operating in your strengths.
Yeah, and I think too, when you start identifying those things, it's like having the courage to step away from something that's familiar and step into something that's unfamiliar, but it might be a step in the right direction to get you going towards that thing that might potentially be something you're passionate about, purposeful in. And it's just taking that step of courage to get there.
Yep, community around you will help make that easier. So if Jim Rohn says you're the average of the 5 people that you hang around. If you're around those kinds of people that are the people that you want to work towards, they're going to encourage you. They're going to show you that path to make that bold step, out into the unknown. And I think that, you need that. If you don't have a good group of friends around you, you don't have people that are challenging you, or you don't have people that are further along in life than you, maybe that's the reason that you're listening to this, right? Like you're hopefully learning and gleaning from other people, but you need to have that crew around you. And again, it's going to take time, it's going to take vulnerability, it's going to take empathy, it's going to take all that stuff to start building that. But when you do, then when you're in that situation and it's tough and you have to make a big decision, they're the people that can kind of be your cheerleaders to get through it.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to start wrapping it up. I want to ask you a few questions.
All right.
Got a little fire round for you.
Okay.
So basically I'll say the sentence and a few words, and then you just sum it up in whatever comes first to your mind. So finish the sentence. You can do anything if.
You can do anything if you're passionate about it.
My mission is.
My mission is to solve problems, to find the right way to do it, and help bring other people along in the process.
Focus is.
Focus is tough. Focus is one of those situations where you're saying no to so many things that you're only saying yes to the things that are taking you in the direction you want to go to. And I hate saying no.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
Yeah. Discipline comes from?
Focus.
Love is?
Love is what my wife needs. And respect is what I need.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, that's a little fire round. A few more questions as we finish it up. Do you have any favorite books besides Love and Respect you talked about? Favorite books, podcasts, tools that have enabled you to grow that are some of your favorites?
Yeah, I mean, Love and Respect definitely for marriage is one that I would highly recommend. Man, there's a lot of John Maxwell books that are great that just kind of are taking you in that direction. Malcolm Gladwell, like all those guys. I think there's one that I read not too long called Leaders Eat Last, which is a Simon Sinek book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, I've yet to really come across the book, with the exception of the book Well Done, that are really good books. Just, again, that's going to spark that curiosity, and I'm going to take you in that direction of, like, you know, this is something that I want to work towards, or I want to encourage myself to do. You know, same thing with Good to Great. It's like, it's just looking at something a little bit differently, and saying, okay, let's get this to improve it. Let's innovate it. Let's make it better. I say except for Well Done, because Well Done is a book that I read a while back, and I was conflicted on it because essentially it's about like killer whales and like how they get killer whales to do all this amazing stuff.
Okay.
But it's essentially like you're encouraging good behavior and you're ignoring bad behavior. And it was this leadership book, and it's probably still out there, but I mean, obviously you've seen what happens with SeaWorld.
Sure.
And all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of a weird book that, like, all right, I understand what you're saying. I think maybe some of the principles are good, but the lens that it was like shaped around was just kind of like, all right, I'm gonna celebrate you when you do exactly what I want you to do. And it was essentially manipulation.
Yeah.
Which manipulation is not a bad thing. Like, when we manipulate people all the time, and it gets this, kind of bad rap. But I think influence might be the better word for it. Mm-hmm. Like, if it's used in the positive sense, and manipulation in the negative sense. But it was really borderline, and so
yeah,
it was a fun one for me. I was like, I'm not sure I agree with all this.
Yeah, I've never read that one, but
I if it's not in print anymore, which who knows?
Yeah, it may not be.
I have a copy, and I'll let you borrow it.
Okay, awesome. Well, how would you like to be remembered?
That's a tough one, because my great-grandfather, I don't know anything about. My grandfather, I really don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I know bits and pieces.
Yeah.
So a part of me goes, aside from like you look at, I say Christopher Columbus, he's kind of getting a bad rap these days.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like the frame of culture kind of determines whether you're worth remembering or not. So I don't know necessarily that I want to be remembered for anything. If I go more spiritual, I just want Christ to say, well done. Like, if I'm in that situation, you've operated in your purpose. You didn't waste your gifts. You were focused on the right things, and you pointed people back to me. That's what I would want to be remembered for. But I don't think people are going to remember me. Period. Mm-hmm. I think that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, what really matters is, like, if we're going to take a more spiritual view of it, is, did I point people to Christ? Did I operate in my gifts and my talents and my purpose? And did I do that well? If I did that, it doesn't matter if I'm remembered or not.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you say that, because I was on a trip in Australia, and it was for study abroad. Mm-hmm. And we were down at, it was Manly Beach, which is where the guy's last name is Manly. I don't know his first name.
Yeah.
But he had a little plaque that was on the beach. And I was sitting there, and I'm one of those guys, anytime I see something historical, I'm kind of reading it, knowing what's going on. And I was sitting there reading this story about Manly, and he was one of the first people who invented surfing or whatnot, and that was the beach that was on. And I'm sitting there watching people just pass by me. Mm-hmm. And yet there's this big plaque on this guy, and no one wants to read it. And I had this epiphany, like, you know what? like when we're gone, we're not necessarily remembered.
Mm.
But what made sense to me was it's not necessarily who it is, but because people don't care about Manly. They care about surfing.
Right.
Surfing's passed on. A lot of people love surfing. But if we think about ourselves, like, it's not so much us that's passed on, it's more of the qualities like you talked about. You know, did I love people? Did I show love to my kids? Did I show love to my wife? Did I pass on traits ultimately that are Christ-like? And those types of qualities pass on for generations to generations. And I think it's how you can do that effectively, and be the best at what you're doing, and pass that on to the people that are around you on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting you say that, because I think the same way in regards to that.
So you're telling me it's a trick question?
Yeah, well, it's not a trick question. I always like to see what people say, but to me, it definitely sounds like morbid when you say, well, no one's gonna remember me. But at the same time, it's like, well, honestly, think about who's the president of South Africa right now. I couldn't tell you. It's funny, we're all in our own little environments, but the things that last are obviously faith is important to myself, and I know you as well.
Mm.
That lasts, but it's not so much the people, but we tend to think that we're important in our own little sphere of influence, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're pointing back to the scoreboard again. And
yeah.
I would just say that is a way to keep score. Like, how am I remembered? But at that point, I'm gone. So
yeah,
not much I can do about it. How somebody interprets that plaque is really going to be how I'm remembered at that point. And at that point, I really don't care.
Yeah. You talked a little about excellence a little bit. What does building excellence mean to you?
Well, I think excellence is obviously built. I don't think you can have excellence without that process. I think the other part of it is excellence is never complete. I don't think that if I do something with excellence today, that I can do the same thing tomorrow and consider it excellence. So I think excellence is a journey, and I think that if you're striving for excellence, you're innovating all the time. And I think that today's innovation becomes yesterday's standard features. I mean, cars didn't used to have seatbelts. Yeah. And that was pretty innovative at the time. Yeah. And now, like, you can't buy a car without one, to my knowledge. Yeah. So if I was just like, hey man, we have cars that have headlights, windshield wipers, and seatbelts, we're doing things with excellence, I would take issue with that. And I think that you have to keep moving to keep aspiring for excellence. And if you're on that path and you're walking down that path, then maybe you're getting a little closer to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a process for sure.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Evan, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Thanks
Absolutely.
For sharing all the knowledge you just shared. There's so many great things that we could have talked for a lot longer about, through all the things you talked about. But also thanks for being a good husband, father, for making a difference for the right reasons. And it'll be definitely very impactful for the people that listen. So thanks for being on the show.
I'm excited, man.
Yep. Thanks.